There is a moment that visits every human life exactly once. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with trumpets or clarity or any of the fanfare we imagine should accompany something so significant. It comes quietly, often disguised as something else entirely. A breakdown that looks like failure. A restlessness that feels like ingratitude. A strange and terrifying sense that everything you have built, everything you have believed about yourself, no longer fits the person you're becoming. You have felt this. Maybe you are feeling it right now. That peculiar sensation of standing in your own life and suddenly not recognizing it. Looking around at the job, the relationships, the daily routines that used to feel like home and wondering why they now feel like a costume someone else chose for you to wear. The unsettling truth is that you are not losing your mind. You're not broken. You are not going through some meaningless crisis that you simply need to push through and ignore. Something far more important is happening. Something that Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to help people understand. Something that most human beings experience, but almost no one is taught to recognize for what it truly is. I have spent years studying Jung's work, sitting with his ideas, watching them come alive in my own life and in the lives of people I have known. And what I have come to understand is this. There is a specific psychological event that happens to nearly every person somewhere between their late 20s and their mid-40s. Sometimes later, sometimes earlier, but it happens. Jung called it the beginning of the second half of life. Others have called it the midlife transition, though that phrase has been so cheapened by jokes about sports cars and desperate decisions that we have lost the sacredness of what it actually means. This is the moment when the personality you built to survive the first half of your life begins to crack. When the mask you constructed so carefully, the one that got you approved of and promoted and loved and accepted, starts to feel suffocating. When the unconscious, which has been patient for decades, finally demands to be heard. And here is what breaks my heart. Most people experience this moment and completely misunderstand it. They think something is wrong with them. They think they need to try harder, push through, get back to normal. They medicate the discomfort. They distract themselves into oblivion. They white-knuckle their way through the most important doorway of their existence because no one ever told them it was a doorway at all. They miss it. Completely. And they spend the rest of their lives wondering why, despite having everything they thought they wanted, they still feel like strangers in their own skin. I do not want that to be your story. And because you are still here, listening to these words, I suspect you do not want that either. There is something in you that knows you are standing at the edge of something. Something that senses this is not just another bad phase to survive. Something ancient and wise that has been waiting for you to pay attention. So let me tell you what is actually happening inside you. Let me give you the words for an experience that has no words. And let me show you what becomes possible if you have the courage not to run. The life you have lived until now, the identity you carry, the version of yourself that shows up at work and family dinners and social gatherings. This is what Jung called the persona. The word comes from the Latin word for mask, the kind actors wore in ancient theater. And that is precisely what it is, a mask. Not in the sense of something fake or dishonest, but in the sense of something constructed, something built, layer by layer, decision by decision, from the moment you were old enough to understand that certain parts of you were acceptable and other parts were not. Think about this. Think about how early it started. Maybe you were a child who felt things deeply, and you learned quickly that deep feeling made the adults around you uncomfortable. So you built a persona that was calm, contained, easy to be around. Or maybe you had ambitions that seemed too large for your family, for your circumstances, so you learned to perform smallness to keep the peace. Maybe anger was forbidden in your household, or sadness, or need. And so those parts of you were pushed down into darkness while your persona learned to smile and cope and pretend everything was fine. This is not your fault. This is survival. This is adaptation. This is what every child does in order to stay connected to the people they depend on for life itself. The persona is not your enemy. It served a purpose. It got you through. But here's what no one tells you. The persona is only supposed to be temporary scaffolding. It is meant to help you navigate the first half of life, the building phase, when you need to establish yourself in the world. Find a career. Form relationships. Create some kind of stability. The persona is the costume you wear to the party because the party has a dress code and you need to get through the door. The problem is that most people forget they are wearing a costume. They fuse with the persona so completely that they believe it is who they actually are. And for a while, sometimes decades, this works. The persona achieves things, gets promotions, gets married, gets validation. And from the outside, everything looks successful. But underneath, in the darkness of the unconscious, everything you have ever rejected about yourself is still alive, still waiting, still growing. Jung called this rejected material the shadow. All the parts of you that were too much, too strange, too intense, too soft, too angry, too hungry, too creative, too wild for the world you grew up in. You did not destroy these parts. You cannot destroy parts of yourself. You can only exile them. And exiled things do not disappear. They plot their return. I once knew a man who had built what most people would call an enviable life. Senior position at a company. Beautiful family. House in a good neighborhood. He came to speak with me after what he called a complete breakdown. But when he described it, all I heard was a breakthrough that he had no framework to understand. He told me that one morning he was driving to work, the same route he had taken for 15 years, and suddenly he had to pull over because he could not breathe. His heart was racing. His hands were shaking. And in that moment, looking at the road ahead of him, the road he had driven thousands of times, he was struck by a single devastating question. Whose life is this? Not in an abstract philosophical way, in a visceral, terrifying way, as if he had suddenly woken up in someone else's body, living out someone else's choices, and he had no idea how he got there. That was the moment that comes only once. The unconscious, after years of patient waiting, had finally grabbed him by the collar and forced him to pay attention. What was happening to him was not a breakdown. It was the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were taught to be. The beginning of the second half of life. The soul's demand to be integrated, to be made whole, to stop living as a fragment of yourself and finally meet the parts you have been running from since childhood. But he did not know this. No one had ever told him this was a thing that could happen, that should happen. So he went to his doctor and got medication to make the feeling stop. He told himself it was stress. He doubled down on work, thinking that more achievement would fill the void. He did everything in his power to get back to normal, and within 2 years he had lost his marriage. His health had deteriorated, and he sat across from me, looking like a man who had been at war. Because he had been. He had been at war with himself. And the self always wins eventually. Jung once wrote something that I have thought about almost every day since I first read it. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Read that again. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What he means is this. All those parts of you that you buried, all those desires and fears and truths that you shoved into the shadow, they do not simply sit there quietly. They are alive. They are active. and they influence your choices in ways you cannot see. The unconscious is not a storage closet. It is not a passive container for your unwanted parts. It is a living force, and when it is ignored, it acts out. This is why you keep ending up in the same kinds of relationships, even though you swore you would never repeat the pattern. This is why you sabotage yourself right before you succeed. This is why you feel compelled toward things that make no logical sense, drawn to situations and people that some part of you knows are not good for you. The shadow is driving. The shadow has been driving for years. And because you do not see it, because no one taught you it was there, you think this is just who you are. You think it is fate. But it is not fate, it is unconsciousness. And unconsciousness, unlike fate, can be changed. The moment that arrives in every life, the moment I am talking about, is the moment when the unconscious has had enough. When the shadow has grown strong enough to crack the persona. When the soul, after years of patient waiting, finally stages its rebellion. This is why it feels like crisis. Because it is. It is a crisis of identity. The identity you built is being challenged by the identity you were born to become. And this is where most people make the crucial mistake. They see the crisis and try to fix it. They try to repair the persona, strengthen the mask, get back to the life they had before. They treat the breakdown as a problem to solve rather than a calling to answer. But you cannot go back. That is the brutal, beautiful truth. Once this process begins, there is no returning to the innocent unconsciousness of before. You can numb it. You can distract yourself. You can spend the rest of your life running, but the call will not stop. It will simply go underground, and from that underground place, it will continue to dismantle you in ways you will not understand. Or you can turn toward it. You can do the terrifying, liberating work of meeting yourself. You can answer the call. There is a story from Greek mythology that Jung loved to reference, the story of the hero's descent into the underworld. Nearly every culture has some version of this myth. The hero, at the height of their power or at the depth of their despair, must travel down into the realm of the dead. They must face monsters, navigate darkness, confront things that terrify them. And at the very bottom, at the darkest point, they find something precious, a treasure, a lost beloved, a piece of themselves they did not know was missing, and they must bring it back up to the light. This is not just a story, it is a map. A psychological map of what happens when a human being finally stops running from themselves and turns inward. The underworld is the unconscious. The monsters are the shadow elements you have spent a lifetime avoiding. And the treasure at the bottom, the thing you are meant to retrieve, is your own wholeness. But here is what the myth does not always make clear. The descent is not optional for those who want to become fully human. You can refuse it. You can live your entire life on the surface, maintaining the persona, never going down. But if you do, you will never know who you actually are. You will live as a half person, a fragment, a self divided against itself, and you will wonder why everything feels so empty no matter how full your life appears. I want to share something with you that changed the way I understand all of this. Years ago, I was reading through Jung's autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and I came across a passage where he describes his own confrontation with the unconscious. It happened in his late 30s, after his break with Freud, and it nearly destroyed him. He wrote about experiencing visions, hearing voices, feeling like he was going mad. For several years, he deliberately engaged with material from his unconscious through a process he called active imagination, dialoguing with figures that appeared in his dreams and fantasies, treating them as real, allowing them to speak. From the outside, this would have looked like psychosis. From the inside, it was the most important work of his life. It was from this period that virtually all of his major ideas emerged. The shadow, the anima, the archetypes, the collective unconscious, everything that made Jung. Jung came from his willingness to descend. And here's what struck me. He did not describe this process as pleasant. He described it as terrifying, as disorienting, as something that required every ounce of courage he had. But he also described it as necessary, as the doorway to everything meaningful that came after. He once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But the path to that privilege runs straight through the underworld. Maybe for you, this looks like the job that used to fulfill you now, feeling meaningless and a strange pull toward something else entirely, something impractical, something your persona says you should not want. Perhaps you have noticed that the relationship you have been in for years has started to feel like a performance, like you are playing a role you no longer remember auditioning for. Or maybe it shows up in the quiet hours, the 3 a.m. awakenings, the vague dread that settles over you when you are alone with no distractions. There is a version of this that appears as anger you cannot explain, a sudden irritability with people and situations that never used to bother you. This is often the shadow leaking through, demanding attention through emotion, because you will not give it attention through reflection. There is another version that looks like depression, a flattening of everything, a loss of color and meaning. This is sometimes the soul going on strike, refusing to participate in a life that no longer fits. And there is a version that shows up in attraction. Strange, inappropriate, confusing attraction. Not always romantic, though sometimes that too. An inexplicable pull toward people who are your opposite. Toward art that disturbs you. Toward ideas that frighten you. This is what Jung called the anima or animus, the contrasexual part of your psyche, trying to get your attention, trying to show you the parts of yourself you have disowned. If you are recognizing yourself in any of this, I want you to leave one word in the comments. Awake. Not for me, for yourself. As a marker that today, in this moment, you acknowledged what is happening inside you instead of looking away. So, what do you do with this? How do you work with a process that feels so overwhelming, so beyond your control? This is where I need you to shift from understanding to practice, because understanding alone will not save you. I have known people who could explain Jung's concepts perfectly, who could lecture on the shadow and the anima for hours, who still had not done an ounce of actual inner work. Knowing about the unconscious is not the same as meaning it. The first thing to understand is that this process cannot be rushed. The descent into the underworld takes as long as it takes. In traditional cultures, initiatory experiences sometimes lasted months or years. The transformation of a human psyche is not a weekend seminar. It is not a 10-step program. It is a remaking of the self, and remakings take time. That said, there are ways to cooperate with the process rather than resisting it. Ways to make the descent conscious rather than letting it happen to you. The work begins with honoring what is trying to emerge. This sounds simple, but it is revolutionary. Most of us have spent our entire lives suppressing, managing, and controlling what arises from within. We have been trained to treat inner experience as something to be handled, something to be fixed, something to be medicated away. The shadow material does not need to be fixed. It needs to be witnessed. There was a woman I once spoke with who had spent 20 years building a persona of perfect competence. She was the one everyone relied on. The stable one. The one who never needed anything. When her shadow began to emerge in her early 40s, it came as rage. Sudden, frightening bursts of anger that seemed to come from nowhere. Her first instinct was to push it down, to apologize, to return to her competent, easygoing self as quickly as possible. But the rage kept coming, and finally, exhausted by the effort of containment, she stopped fighting it. She did not act it out. She did not hurt anyone, but she allowed herself to feel it, to sit with it, to ask it what it wanted. What she discovered beneath the rage was grief. Decades of grief. Grief for all the time she had swallowed her own needs to take care of others. Grief for the parts of herself she had sacrificed to be the stable one. The rage was the guardian at the gate of that grief, keeping it locked away because she had never been given permission to feel it. When she finally allowed the grief, when she let herself mourn what she had lost, the rage began to soften. Not disappear entirely, but transform. It became a healthy boundary, a capacity to say no, an ability to take care of herself without drowning in guilt. The shadow, once met and integrated, becomes a source of power. The very thing you most fear about yourself often contains the energy you most need. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about integrating the shadow. Not destroying it, not transcending it, integrating it, making it part of your conscious self rather than letting it operate from the darkness. The second shift involves paying attention to your dreams. I know this sounds old-fashioned, almost superstitious. We live in a culture that treats dreams as random neural firings, meaningless static from a brain doing nighttime maintenance. But Jung understood something different. He knew that dreams are messages from the unconscious, delivered in the language of symbol and image, because the unconscious does not speak in words. When you are going through this transition, when the second half of life is calling, your dreams will often become more vivid, more strange, more insistent. You may dream of houses with rooms you did not know existed, of being chased by figures you cannot see, of water, rising or falling, vast or contained, of death and rebirth, of animals, wild or trapped. These images are not random. They are communications. The unconscious is trying to tell you something it cannot tell you any other way. The practice here is simple, but requires discipline. Keep a notebook by your bed. The moment you wake, before you check your phone, before you speak to anyone, write down whatever you remember. Fragments are fine. Feelings are valid. Over time, patterns will emerge. The unconscious will begin to trust that you are listening, and it will speak more clearly. I remember reading about Jung's own practice with dreams. He would often dialogue with the figures that appeared in them, treating them as autonomous personalities with their own perspectives. He called this active imagination. The shadow figure in your dream is not just a symbol. It is a living part of you, and you can speak with it. Ask it what it wants. Ask it what it has been trying to show you. The answers that come may surprise you. The third shift is perhaps the most difficult. You must learn to tolerate paradox. The rational mind wants resolution. It wants clear answers. This or that, right or wrong. But the work of individuation requires you to hold opposites together without collapsing them. You are both strong and vulnerable, both accomplished and just beginning, both the person you have been and the person you are becoming. The desire to resolve these contradictions too quickly is a defense against the deeper transformation that can only happen in the tension. There is a concept in alchemy that Jung wrote about extensively called the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of opposites. The alchemists understood that gold, the precious thing they sought, could only be created by bringing together elements that seemed incompatible: fire and water, masculine and feminine, light and dark. The gold is born in the union, not in the victory of one side over the other. This applies directly to your inner work. The shadow is not your enemy to be defeated. It is your lost brother or sister to be welcomed home. The persona is not a lie to be discarded. It is a tool that served its purpose, and now needs to be put in its proper place. You are not trying to become someone entirely new. You are trying to become whole, and wholeness includes everything. If this is landing for you, I want you to share this video with someone who is going through their own version of this. Not because I need the views, because they need the words. Someone in your life is standing at this threshold right now, and they do not know what it is. They think they are falling apart. They need to know they might be falling together. There is something that happens on the other side of this process that is almost impossible to describe until you have experienced it. The best I can offer is this. You become less, and in that lessening, you become more. The persona that once consumed all your energy to maintain begins to rest. It does not disappear. You still need a persona to function in the world, but it becomes a tool you use rather than a prison you live in. You can put it on and take it off. You know the difference between the mask and the face beneath it. The shadow, once so terrifying, becomes an ally. The energy that was locked in suppression is now available for living. You find that you have access to parts of yourself you never knew existed. Creativity flows more freely because you are no longer censoring yourself. Relationships deepen because you are no longer performing. You can be with other people in their darkness because you have been with yourself in yours. There is a quality of presence that emerges, a groundedness. You stop being so reactive because you know yourself better. When someone criticizes you, you can evaluate the criticism instead of collapsing into shame or exploding into defense. You have met your shadow. You know what is true about you and what is not. You become harder to manipulate because you are no longer manipulating yourself. And there is something else, something quieter and more mysterious. A sense that you are participating in something larger than your individual story. Jung believed that the process of individuation was not just personal but also served the collective. By becoming whole, you bring something to the world that only you can bring. The unique configuration of your gifts, your wounds, your integrated shadow becomes an offering. Not in a grandiose way. Often in very small, very ordinary ways, but the ripples extend further than you will ever know. I once heard a story about an old man in a small village. He had lived a quiet life, nothing remarkable by external standards. When he died, the entire village came to his funeral. Someone asked why, what had been special about this man, and the answer was simply that whenever you were with him, you felt more like yourself. Not more like him. More like yourself. That is what an individuated person offers the world. Their wholeness gives others permission for their own. Jung wrote, toward the end of his life, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. That line has stayed with me for years. What he is saying is that consciousness itself is the purpose. Becoming aware. Making the unconscious conscious. Not for its own sake, but because in doing so, we illuminate something that was previously dark. We add to the light in the world. This is not about perfection. The individuated person is not someone who has resolved all their issues, achieved enlightenment, transcended all human struggle. That is a fantasy, and a dangerous one. The individuated person is simply someone who has stopped running, someone who has turned to face themselves and kept facing day after day, year after year, someone who has learned to hold the tension of opposites without splitting, someone who is more integrated, more whole, more themselves than they were before. And here's what I want you to understand. This process is available to you, right now, wherever you are, whatever you have done or failed to do. The call you are feeling is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something is right. It is the soul knocking, the deeper self waiting. the unconscious extending an invitation. You can refuse it. Many do. Most do. They dismiss the restlessness. They medicate the depression. They stay busy enough that the voice cannot be heard, and they survive. But surviving is not the same as living. You know this. You have always known this. There is a part of you that has been waiting your entire life for someone to tell you that what you are feeling is real, that the dissatisfaction is not ingratitude, that the restlessness is not weakness, that the sense of something missing is not delusion. That part of you is the self, the capital S self that Jung spoke of, the whole you that exists beneath the fragmented persona, the you that knows exactly who you are meant to become. The invitation is here. The doorway is open. It will not stay open forever, not because it closes arbitrarily, but because life is short and energy is finite, and the patterns that keep you asleep get stronger the longer they run. This is the moment. Not next year when things settle down. Not when the kids are older, or the job is different, or the relationship is fixed. Now. This messy, uncertain, terrifying now. I want to return to where we started. That moment at 2 a.m. when the house is silent and your mind is racing. That strange sensation of standing in your own life and not recognizing it. That restlessness that will not be satisfied by anything the world offers. I called it the moment that happens once in every life, and I stand by that. But I want to add something. The moment itself is not the once-in-a-lifetime event. The moment happens to almost everyone. What is once in a lifetime is what you do with it. Whether you recognize it for what it is, whether you have the courage to answer, whether you step through the doorway or spend the rest of your days standing at the threshold, sensing something you will never allow yourself to touch. The people who miss it completely are not stupid or weak. They are simply uninformed. No one told them that psychological birth was possible, that the first half of life is just scaffolding, that the real work begins when everything they built starts to crumble. They do not know that the crumbling is the point, that you have to die to your old self before your true self can live, but you know now you cannot unknow it. That is the danger and the gift of awareness. Once you see, you cannot unsee. You can look away, but you will always know you are looking away. You can distract yourself, but the distraction will have a different taste now. There is a crack in the armor, and the light is getting in. Jung once said, "We cannot change anything until we accept it." Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. What he is saying is that the path forward starts with acceptance. Accepting where you are. Accepting who you have been. Accepting what you have avoided and why you avoided it. Not condemning yourself for the persona you built or the shadow you exiled. You did the best you could with what you knew. Everyone does, but now you know more. And with that knowing comes responsibility. Not the heavy guilt-laden responsibility of should. The sacred responsibility of finally having a chance to become real. The 2 a.m. thoughts are not your enemy. They are your invitation. The restlessness is not a problem to solve. It is a compass pointing toward your own depths. The sense that something is missing is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that you are more than you have allowed yourself to be. Type the words "I am ready" in the comments. Not as a wish. Not as something you hope to feel someday. As a declaration. The first thing you say out loud about who you are choosing to become. Let this be the marker, the moment you can look back on and say, "That was when I stopped running." The path will not be easy. There will be days when you want to go back to sleep, when the old patterns feel so much safer than the uncertainty of becoming. There will be moments when the shadow material that surfaces feels too dark, too shameful, too overwhelming to meet. There will be stretches where you cannot see the progress and you wonder if you are fooling yourself. But you will also have moments of such profound aliveness that you will wonder how you ever tolerated the half-life you were living before. moments of connection with yourself and others that make everything you went through worth it. Moments where you catch a glimpse of who you are becoming and you weep with something you can only call recognition. You will know yourself. And in knowing yourself, you will